Iran is hoping to convince world powers its nuclear program serves a peaceful purpose and isn't about making bombs. A new round of talks has begun in Baghdad all about it, with further pressure on Tehran to stop higher-grade uranium enrichment, which is feared could be put to military use at some point in the future. Iran's already tried to ease worsening tensions by tentatively agreeing to new UN inspections of sites which are suspected of involvement in atomic weapons development. But Washington says there'll be no let-up in the heat on Tehran. Fresh sanctions are expected to hit in just over a month, targeting the country's oil and nuclear sectors as well as international trade links. Let's get some thoughts on this from Chris Bambury in London. He's a political analyst. Chris, good evening. The West doesn't want to bargain, by the looks of it, with Iran over sanctions, and it wants its supposed nuclear sites disclosed first. Do you think Tehran's arguments will just be ignored at this meeting by the West?
Well, I think there's two things going on here, Kevin. I think, firstly, we are, as I understand it, the talks have actually resumed this evening in Baghdad. Originally, they were supposed to have ended for the day. And it's interesting the talks are continuing. There is an offer on the ground from the 5+1, the 5 members of the Security Council plus Germany, about cutting the uranium enrichment programme from 20% down to 5%. The Iranians have not rejected that and indeed have said it's an offer they can talk about. Informally, some sources in Iran have said that actually there's a possibility of this being a basis for a deal if the quid pro quo with sanctions being removed. And in the meantime, we've seen the Iranian currency go back up in value against the dollar in expectation there is going to be a deal. I don't think there will be a deal in the next few hours. I think this could be a lengthy process. Firstly, in America, it's an election year, so Obama wants to be seen to be driving a hard bargain. And secondly, Tehran doesn't need to rush to a deal because the sanctions, although they're quite tough, aren't biting because China, India and even Italy are taking up the slack. So there's that discussions going on, which hopefully, for all those who want to see a peaceful solution, will come to fruition. At the same time, we have this rhetoric coming out of Western capitals, which seems to belay the fact there is any talks going on at all. I mean, you had in Tel Aviv, Ehud Barak, the Israeli defense minister, has said that the talks really should not be occurring, that there should be no deal, you can't trust the Iranians. This offer of inspection doesn't mean anything whatsoever. Now, perhaps you might say the Israelis would say that, but from the US Congress, we have belligerent voices. And then, lo and behold, this morning, you open your newspaper in Britain and you discover that it's revealed Britain has plans to intervene in the case of a war between Israel and Iran. Now, I don't think those plans are that the Royal Navy is going to impose an arms embargo around Israel or the RAF is going to impose a no-fly zone over Tel Aviv. What the intervention is going to help the Americans to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. So there's two things going on here. The rhetoric, which is still warlike and belligerent towards Iran, and these discussions in Baghdad, which on the surface seem to be going quite well. You say the sanctions aren't biting much at the moment, but of course there's a new lot to come in July, and the US Senate's backed further sanctions on Iran. Is that all they can do to try and force Iran's hand here? No, they're also trying to have a military build-up in the Persian Gulf, where we're seeing growing numbers of American warships and growing numbers of American personnel, plus some Brits and French tagging along behind as usual. Iran is, of course, virtually surrounded by American bases, not just the American presence in Afghanistan. So they're ratcheting up the military pressure in there. It's associated as well with the tensions over Syria, and as we were hearing in a previous, just now in Lebanon. So there is a sort of a game going on here, which is a very dangerous game. The military build-up in the Gulf is particularly dangerous. For those who recall, at the end of the 1980s Iraq-Iran war, the Americans intervened on the side of Iraq when they seemed to be losing the war and shot down an Iranian civilian airliner with over 280 dead. And the Iranians remember that. And today, indeed, Iranian Prime Minister Ahmadinejad was remembering chemical attacks by Iraq on Iran during that war and pointing out that Western governments, including America, provided the basis for those weapons of mass destruction which were used by the Saddam Hussein regime, and saying that the people responsible actually be brought to book. So, you know, the ratcheting up of military tension plus sanctions creates a dangerous situation. But America and the European Union aren't able on their own to simply embargo Iranian oil. The Chinese, the Indians and the Italians can pick up the slack here. And how broad a base of support is there amongst ordinary Iranians for a peaceful nuclear energy programme? It's pretty strong, isn't it? Well, this has now become a touchstone for Iranian nationalism, because essentially the West are telling the Iranians you can't do that. Although, interestingly, the West in the 1970s were encouraging an Iranian nuclear program. You know, there were Americans, Brits and Germans were queuing up to sell them the technology, but that was under the Shah of Iran, so that was a different story then. But I think it's become a touchstone of Iranian nationalism, and people in Iran have long memories of Western intervention in Iran, the support for the Shah, the 1953 coup, which overthrew a democratically elected government of Mossadegh to impose the Shah's dictatorial rule, the support that they gave to torture, the secret police savak. All of this is remembered in Iran, and therefore this has become, I feel like, as I say, a touchstone for Iranian nationalism. And many people who would not support Ahmadinejad or would not support Khamenei, the supreme ruler, would take a position on this because it's an issue of national pride. And I don't really think the West understand just how far that goes and how deep the record of people's memory and understanding of Western involvement in Iran is, which stokes resentment of the West treating Iran as if it was some little child and refusing to accept the repeated promises and statements that this is a peaceful nuclear program. I actually oppose all nuclear programs, but I think it's ironic, speaking in London tonight, that we have a British government telling Iran you can't have a nuclear program, which is replacing its Trident nuclear missile so-called defense system, and is expanding its nuclear program. You know, so if it's okay for the Brits and it's okay for other Europeans and North Americans, why not for Iran? I mean, there's double standards here.
Chris Banbury, thanks ever so much for your thoughts and being on the programme, London-based political analyst as you are.
Thank you.